welcome to today's Cyber Threat Report. Today's Thursday, July 14th, 2011. Joining us today, we have Dave Gross, Nancy Grover, and I'm Brian Rexroad. If you'd like to give us feedback on this report, or if you have questions, please feel free to contact us at cyberthreat@list.att.com. Today we'll be discussing a little bit about some blocking activity that Google is doing on certain domain names. Nancy will tell us a little bit about that. Dave will provide a follow-up from last week's discussion about some vulnerabilities associated with Apple's products, iPhone, iPad, and iPod, and there's a malware scanning tool that's available. He'll talk a little bit about that. And Dave will also talk about some femto cell compromises that enable potential hackers to record some phone calls. So that's an important aspect that we'll talk about. And last, I'll talk about some recent Internet anomalies that we have seen over the course of the last week, as well as some current activity that's taking place. So let's go ahead and shift over to Nancy here. Nancy, what's Google doing, and why is that important to us?
Sure. What Google's doing is that they have now blocked an entire subdomain, and this is a subdomain that ends with .co.cc. And they did this because of a lot of malware and spam coming from that particular subdomain. So about a month ago, or well, not quite a month ago, but last month, Google posted something on their security blog, and that's what you see here on the screen, warning people that they were going to potentially or had the right to do this, and that they would probably do this if they didn't stop seeing this sort of activity go down. They discovered that the .co domain, which actually belongs to Australia, that there seemed to be more malware and spam coming from there than anywhere else. And as they investigated a little bit more, they found that it wasn't just .co, but a subdomain of .co, and that being .cc. That's owned by a Korean company. And this Korean company is doing something they call free hosting. So basically, I could go to this group and get some domain names for free, or for $1,000, I could register 15,000 at a time. And you know that's really convenient, obviously, for the spammers and things. Right now, there are over 11 million URLs that are hosted there or registered with that particular domain. So you know, again, they've blocked them completely. So if I were to do a Google search, none of those .co.cc addresses are going to show up at all. And, you know, a lot of people can applaud them and say this is the right thing to do, because now the people who own that .cc subdomain can go in and clean house and get rid of these malware and spam people. But at the same time, there's some criticism, too, of them being so, you know, free-wielding about their power to block people. I don't know. What do you guys think about that?
Well, I think there are a few actually interesting aspects of this. First of all, you know, it's a normal practice to block domain names that are associated with malicious activity. Domain names, IP addresses, and URLs. And, you know, obviously it's desirable to block the most specific ones. I think the situation here is where they're taking a sort of a general perspective that is perhaps have decided that the majority of the domain names in this space are associated with malicious activity, or perhaps that it's gotten to be such a complex problem that, you know, they have little choice but to basically block a large set of domains and generalize them into the category of being malicious, and perhaps taking with it some legitimate activity that is denying, you know, legitimate users to their activity. You know, actually, sort of peripheral to this, I wrote a blog that's posted on our blog site about how to be careful about the cloud service providers that you choose for you to provide your cloud services, for a similar reason, that is that your sites could be co-located with malicious activity and end up getting blocked in very much the same way. So, you know, a couple of things here. One, I applaud Google for at least posting a warning about the subject before they do it. It gives, at least gives owners the opportunity to rethink how they're doing things. A second aspect of this is that it's been a pet peeve of mine for a long time that there isn't enough accountability for registration of domain names. That is, there should be domain registration information available for accountability of the users that have registered those. It's not the folks that are really posting or providing those domain names that are doing the bad thing per se. It's the spammers that are doing the bad thing, or the ones that are posting the malware. So there are a lot of facets to this that I find very interesting, and personally, I'm not criticizing them at all. That they've got to do, that Google has to do their business to protect their customers, and they have a heck of a lot of users out there, a lot of customers that are potentially subjected to this malicious activity.
I agree also with everything that you said, and this isn't even the first time that Google has blocked people like this. Now, before they did block a Polish free host site, but in that case they've just blocked the servers that were actually doing the hosting rather than the entire domain. And yeah, unfortunately there are, I'm sure, a number of legitimate sites that are doing business using that co.cc domain, and sadly, they're going to have to find a new home for their stuff, but I don't know what else to do, and I applaud them too. I mean, if this takes out as much malware and spam as they think it will, I say hooray.
Well, I think, though, that it's going to be a very temporary situation because the spammers seem to be very nimble and be able to adapt to these kinds of things, and so I think they're just going to register their domain names in other areas and make it so that it's not so concentrated, so you can't just block one big chunk of namespace. And so, it's just going to scatter these things. You're still going to wind up with the same amount of stuff. It's just going to be all over the place.
Wow, that's a good point. And you know what? I forgot to mention that it seems that a lot of the users that are affected here, I don't mean us, the user, I mean the people who own these domain names, they're actually migrating to .cc.tb. That seems to be where a large group of them are heading now.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So,
yeah, I like your tactic of just having them spread out across the board.
A sort of the irony here, an analogous type of situation is what I call free mail. It's a little different here because in this case it looks like they're distributing malware through these domain names. And as Dave pointed out, and as analysts we well know, there are an awful lot of domain names that are being used for malicious purposes. I think we track on the order of about 3,000 or 5,000 of those that are associated with just malicious activity. But along those lines, free mail is a similar kind of situation, and I think it's very important that providers of these services realize that there is a need for accountability associated with that. That is, if some criminal or some unknown can come in and put fictitious information about who they are, register for the service, and then abuse it until they get kicked off and then repeat the process under another fictitious name, that creates a fundamental problem, and it really erodes the integrity of the Internet in general. And we've seen a number of attacks that are using free mail services, not just Gmail, but other services as well. That whether it be for spamming or even spear phishing activities, that is a fundamental problem. So this is an equivalent
an email service that's not free, aside from someone who owns a domain name and uses that as an email.
The less it costs, the easier it is.
Yeah.
Right.
And the tendency is to, when it's a free service, the expectations in terms of the integrity of the service tend to be lower, and so those are important attributes. Very good point, and thanks for bringing that up with us. The next topic we'll discuss here, the malware scanner, and Dave, you can go ahead and take that into the femto activity as well.
All right. Well, last time we talked about the site where there was a malicious Adobe Acrobat document, a PDF, that allowed you to jailbreak your iPhone or iPad or iPod Touch. it was taking advantage of a vulnerability that hasn't been patched yet. So this was something that is one of the things happening that may be in reaction to it, although they don't say specifically for this vulnerability. But there's a version of this virus barrier product that is a malware scanner, but now it's been made available in the Apple App Store to protect the various iOS devices. Evidently, it can scan for malicious content in various forms, in email attachments, when you're downloading files, and in files that are already downloaded. I believe it also may be able to scan as you're uploading files. It can look for things like keyloggers, malicious zip files, and spyware, things like that. However, it's not automatic. It's only invoked by user action, and it also can't scan other apps. Because of the way the security is set up on the iPhone, in iOS, the different apps can't look at each other, and so basically they can only look at their own environment there. So this is one alternative to trying to protect yourself until patches are available. It may help with some various vulnerabilities. Usually these things are not good about detecting zero-day vulnerabilities, like last week that vulnerability was, but they're normally quicker to react than the vendors in terms of getting patches out there. Normally these virus scanners are able to push a signature much quicker and be able to detect things that have already been found. So any thoughts about this?
Yeah, what happens, let's say it identifies something. Does it do anything to remediate the problem? Or does it just tell you there's a problem, and then what do you do about the problem?
From what it looks like, it actually deletes it.
Oh, okay. Well, that's pretty good. Did it ask you first, I assume?
It wasn't specific in the article that I read. I'm not sure. I don't have experience with this one.
And so obviously it went through the App Store process of approval, so I'm assuming it's doing
right.
it.
They mentioned in the article that this is one of the first ones that Apple has actually put in regarding security.
Yeah, I was surprised, too. That's why I was kind of talking to myself about it, making the approval, because I'm surprised to see that it's there, but it's nice to see, too.
Right. Brian, did you have something? I wasn't hearing you.
Yeah, so I just wanted to make sure it's clear to the listeners here. We have not evaluated this product. We're not necessarily endorsing it. But I think it's a very positive note in the sense that, we're traditionally, I've personally found that most of the scanning devices or the anti-malware tools that are out there, they're tools for Android, Windows-based devices. I haven't seen much in terms of supporting Apple products, so it's encouraging to see that there's a product here, and especially encouraging that, the issue that was identified last week is one that's being addressed here. But obviously there are some limitations, but I believe the price is rather low and probably well worth the investment, particularly, in my opinion, if you have a jailbroken device or if you have any concern about the exploit that was described last week.
Right. Okay. Very good. Moving on, I'm going to talk about these femto cells. Evidently, this is happening in the UK. There's these Vodafone femto cells that have been distributed to customers. Basically, the idea of a femto cell is it's a device that you plug in at your home or your location where you don't get good cell coverage, and on one side you plug it into your wired internet connection, and the other side it will produce a 3G signal so that your phone can connect to this device, and then the device will go over the Internet, connect back to the back office, so to speak, of the wireless carrier to be able to carry your phone calls. And the way these devices are set up, you have to administer on the device the devices that are going to be paired with it. So not everybody that goes by gets paired with this. It's only the owner of the femtocell, because it's meant to provide service only for those specific devices. So anyhow, some hackers have posted details of how to rewrite the software in these femtocells that are supplied by Vodafone. And what they are doing is turning these into what's called IMSI catchers, which will grab phones that are in the vicinity and, essentially be like a mini tower to those phones. And so any calls that get made by those phones will be recorded, because that's what this hacked software does. And in the article, they claim that one of the issues that let the people get into these Vodafone femtocells is that they all have the same root password on these devices, so it's easy to get in there and update the software. So it's just an interesting thing that, to be aware of, that there are these devices out there, and there may be ways that they can be hacked in order to do things that they weren't originally designed to or meant to be doing.
Let me make sure I have this right, because I think I understood it differently initially. So rather than outsiders using the femtocell to listen in on phone calls of the phones attached or paired with the femtocell, this is allowing the femtocell user owner to listen in on phone calls of others that are in the vicinity of their femtocell. Did I say that, or is that right?
That's what it seemed to indicate in the article, yes.
I had it the other way around. I was thinking this allowed outsiders to listen, or to basically go through the femtocell to listen to those devices paired to it. Okay.
Yeah, I think if I understand correctly, this turns into a facilitator that is a bad person with possession of a femtocell, becomes a facilitator of a man-in-the-middle attack, so to speak.
Right.
That allows the femtocell is considered a valid access point to the mobile network on the wireline side, and then on the wireless side, it provides the opportunity to catch 3G devices, that is, to provide service to them if the device is opened up. Normally, the way a femtocell works is only certain devices that are registered with that cell are permitted to connect to it. This is a case where presumably they're able to open that up and capture other voice calls and other users in the vicinity, and also get access to the media associated with that access. So this is actually something that we've been paying a lot of attention to. There's been some, there was a research demonstration, I believe, at the Black Hat conference last year. It was either Black Hat or DEF CON, but certainly one of those where they demonstrated this kind of capability, not specifically with these devices, but the fact that it can be facilitated with a readily available device is obviously a concern, and one that we've been paying attention to make sure that this doesn't become a vulnerability on our network. And we're taking an approach at that in at least a couple of different directions. One is to make sure that femtocells can't be abused. The other aspect of it is to look for indications of users that are getting captured on the network as a part of our analysis. So, perhaps, in fact, we may choose to have some additional discussion on this next week. I believe Josh Lackey will be with us. Mm-hmm. He is, in fact, one of our researchers on this specific topic.
Yeah, and I also find it interesting that all these years later, you guys probably remember years ago when you could go, I imagine you still can, you go online and find lists and lists and lists of all of the default passwords for all the equipment that's out there, infrastructure type equipment. And I see here, or it seems to me here, that we have another situation where they are using, a default password for root or to get into the machine. And, that's something obviously that's available probably on those lists that have been around forever, and nobody seems to be doing anything about that. Isn't that your first rule of thumb, change the default password?
Well, in fact, it's a little more than that. I think the situation here isn't that there's a default password; it's that they have a shared password across many devices, and that's been discovered. It may, in fact, be a very complex password. I haven't looked into that, but fundamentally, I think the bigger issue here is the fact that they're using passwords at all. There are certainly private key solutions where there could be a unique key associated with each of these devices, and that would provide basically a strong authentication mechanism to get into the devices and be able to manage those without having to have a password at all. So there are some fundamental flaws in the way some of these things are being done, and hopefully issues like this will become a learning experience.
Right.
All right. Well, thanks. Very good. That was a very good segment there, Dave. Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome.
So on the next segment here, I'll talk a little bit about the recent anomalies that we are observing on the Internet. I thought I'd start with our composite Internet traffic activity and show some significant anomaly that is taking place currently. This snapshot was just taken a couple of hours ago. And there's an arrow on the screen here, a red arrow, sort of pointing out the anomaly that I wanted to point out with you. It's in the category that we defined as a business category of applications on the network. This is, in fact, a denial of service attack that's taken place. So I'll go ahead and drill into that a little bit further in a moment here, but we'll see this again in a moment. Over the last 7 days, basically what we're looking at here is a summary of the activity that we've seen that shows up as an anomaly. That is, there's some change in the behavior of these ports and protocols that we're seeing on the Internet. And I evaluated a number of these, but only a few of them really show up in what I'll describe as our radar as what I would consider to be security relevant. So we'll go ahead and take a look at a couple of those. The ICMP Type 0 activity, the IP Protocol 50 activity, those are really just increases in volumes. It has to do with changes in the profile of Internet activity. They're not security relevant. We have a couple of ports and protocols that are showing up, 3478, 5060, 5223. All of those I've evaluated, haven't found those to be particularly security relevant. One that is security relevant, this is TCP port, destination port 22. We have an increase in the number of flows on that port, and that happens to be, in fact, that activity that we're seeing on the composite wallboard. And what I'm showing here is basically a snapshot looking back about 3 days of that activity. And there are actually two lines on this graph. There's the red line and the blue line. The red line represents basically our normal flow activity per hour on port 22. And as you can see, a typical hour we would see on the order of about 25 million flows per hour on this port. That's jumped up to on the order of about 450 million flows per hour. And then the other line is showing a particular address block that I'm not revealing the specific address block here, but as you can see here, that increase is almost entirely attributable to a particular address block, and that happens to be the target of this denial of service attack that's taking place. So I'm hoping that this particular victim is aware of this issue. We'll be checking into it to see if there's any specific action we need to take associated with this, but that is an ongoing denial of service attack that's taking place. It happens to be on port 22, a SYN flooding attack. The next item we'll go ahead and take a look at is UDP port, destination port 161. That's an increase in the number of flows that is specifically probes associated with scanning activity that we're seeing on the network. Let's go ahead and take a quick look at that. Port 161, UDP, is associated with SNMP. That's Simple Network Management Protocol. We've talked about this in some previous episodes. That is associated with basically probing network devices or host devices for status information. And that's basically a polling protocol that's available. It's also used for sending traps. And in this particular case, what we're seeing is scanning activity on the Internet associated with this particular port. In this specific case, it looks like this scanning activity, obviously very aggressive, well on the order of 450,000 probes per hour that we saw here.
Hey, Brian, do you guys ever, do you think this is in any way related to the denial of service attack that you were just showing us, or completely unrelated?
No, this would be unrelated.
Okay.
This particular scan, I looked into it a little bit. It appears to be targeting a specific organization, and we're actually in the process of notifying that organization of the situation as we speak. So normally these scanning activities tend to be very random. They tend to be looking for any kind of a device that might be accessible. This particular event appears to be targeted toward a particular organization. And, like I said, that's one of the benefits of this level of analysis is that we can see cases where it's targeted versus cases where it's just random scanning across the network. Obviously, in any case, you want to make sure that you're protecting any SNMP interface. There are very few reasons that you'd ever want to have SNMP exposed on the Internet. So, good question, Nancy. And we are constantly looking for cases where there might be relationships between events. This is
I assume that you have also run into situations where things like this are related, that maybe, several things are happening all at once.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep, and we can find those kind of things as well.
Right.
I was just going to comment about your port 22 before you go on to the other one. That seems unusual for the DDoS on 22. I mean, we rarely see that. We see more DDoS on, port 80 on website pages and stuff like that. It's not so often that we see a denial of service attack against port like 22, which is just a normal login port.
Yeah, that's a good point, Dave. I think, there are cases where it appears they're trying to do some sort of a network flood and aren't really paying attention or don't care what port they're flooding. And different attackers have different levels of knowledge about what they're actually attacking and how they go about it. So it's difficult to say what the situation is here. I did not dig in to see, specifically what services might, they might be trying to disrupt in this case. It was enough to determine that this is actually a denial of service attack for the purposes of this discussion. But perhaps they have port 22 is associated with SSH. That's basically a remote login. Maybe the intent here is to shut down some sort of an administrative interface associated with a particular organization. It's hard to tell what the exact motivation might be.
Right.
Good point. All right, so I think that covers our show today. Just a final reminder, if you have any feedback or questions or topics you would like us to cover, the email address is cyberthreat@list.att.com. And just a couple of other reminders, you can access this webcast anytime you like. It's accessible from the AT&T Tech Channel, that's techchannel.att.com. And you can also access this as a podcast. Just go to the iTunes store and search for the AT&T Cyber Threat Report. And unless there are any final comments, thank you very much for joining us today. Again, Dave Gross, Nancy Grover, and Brian Rexroad. Have a good week.